Hi everyone, this is Ernest Makhaya.
Not yet. Not yet, Ernest. Okay. Okay, Ernest, good afternoon, everybody. Our host, Ernest, will take over.
Hi everyone, this is Ernest Makhaya. I'm the Chief Editor for Goal.com South Africa. Welcome to Football Africa Forum Online Summit, where we'll be discussing various issues, including the COVID-19, the impact that it has on football, on African football specifically. With me is Gerrit Davids from Harum Media, as well as Farai Razano. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having us, Ernest.
Good afternoon.
Guys, let's start with you, Gerrit. The impact that this COVID-19 has had on football. We've been, I think, 2 months now without football, something that we love the most in Africa. What would you say the COVID-19 has had the impact on football in general?
You know, the best answer I could give everybody is that the CEO of the Edelman Group, a PR company, international PR company, said it is a complex situation because it's both a health crisis as well as an economic crisis. And we know that the modern day football ecosystem is built first on sport as an interest and as an activity, and then second as an economic base, of which if that tap is closed, then every piece of land, meaning the assets, the players, the administrators, suffer at the end of the day. So one is almost at which end, not knowing what to give as an answer. But safe to say, people say put lives first and the economy second. You can revive the economy, but you can't revive a dead person. So that would be my introductory remarks.
Cool. Farai, let's get your views.
Well, like Gerrit has just mentioned, I think it's a very difficult situation in that you're dealing with lives on the one hand, you're dealing with sports or competitions on the other hand. In as much as things can come to a halt and you start again, some of these, if not all sporting codes, have time periods within which competitions have to be completed. There are obligations to a whole lot, many stakeholders involved.
Yep. Go ahead, Farai.
Oh, sorry, I thought Gerrit was speaking. So it then becomes a problem where you have organizers trying to complete competitions within certain times. There are issues of player contracts, issues of broadcast contracts, issues of a whole lot of other stakeholders, and that makes it very difficult for almost everyone involved to ensure that we strike that balance, if at all it's possible, because in any event, if you were to insist on continuing with competitions, what will happen is everyone would get sick and it will be impossible anyway. So I think that's the difficult situation everyone is dealing with at the moment.
You've already touched on player contracts. It may be early for me to ask that question, yeah. But in terms of the law, what does the law say when it comes to player contracts? Especially, we know that in football, usually player contracts expire on the 30th of June, and we are already approaching June, and football hasn't started in other countries. Although we know that some countries are starting soon. What is the law saying in terms of player contracts when they expire?
Well, like you said, we will get into detail on the issue of contracts, player contracts. But basically, one needs to always be mindful of the fact that player contracts are just like any other employment contract, subject to the employment laws of the country. And there are all sorts of other obligations that come with that: occupational health issues, compensation in relation to injury or death that occurs on duty, and so forth. So that we can touch in detail later. And what then happens is you're racing against time. Yes, most of the contracts expire on the 30th of June for those that are in their last year. At the same time, you can't force them to play now because it's impossible. They'll get sick and probably bring other issues of compensation in terms of occupational health issues. And then you have these other proposals that have now been made by FIFA in terms of trying to extend those contracts, which it's a topic that I'm excited about. I might actually start getting into detail in the wrong platform. But to cut the long story short, I think it's a complex issue. It's not something that anyone could profess to have a straightforward or simple, clear-cut answer on that issue.
We've been joined by Shehu Diko, who is the chairman of the League Management Company Limited, managers of the Elite Nigeria Professional Football League, as well as the current second vice president of the Nigerian Football Federation, the position he has held since December of 2014. Shehu, welcome to the show. We are struggling to hear you. In the meantime, while you're trying to sort out your audio issues, Gerrit, I'm going to bring you in here. In terms of the media, I know some of the guys that I work with have been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. Some had to work from home, some lost their jobs. In terms of the media, how has the impact been?
Well, if you look at traditional print media, we know that they basically down the rabbit hole, because print in itself is not be considered, in South Africa at least, as an essential service. And with people spending time on social media, on various other conversations other than reading what digital media or online media would sort of present to them, the media, we see there's real struggles going on. I also I'm involved in the travel industry, and I say to people, if you want to see heartbreak stories, read what the travel industry is going to do. And so it is the media. Football has got nothing to report media's got nothing to report that's live for that matter. Okay, yeah. So we're regurgitating content at this point in time, and we're looking for stories. So whether you say I'm in maritime industry, whether I'm in the legal profession, whether I'm in the textile and industry manufacturing business, or whether I'm in football media, we all have gone through the same suffering at this point in time.
Farai, maybe let's go back to the issue of law, maybe in terms of clear commitments and clubs, commitments to players. What have you heard so far when it comes to, have the players been forced to take salary cuts, and what is the law saying about that? Farai, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, can you just run through the question again?
I was asking about, in terms of the law, what does it say? Should players be forced to take salary cuts during this time? As we know that it's a situation that has affected all the industries. What have you heard so far, and what is the law saying in terms of player salary cuts?
Yeah, well, look, I think the discussion about players taking salary cuts and in some instances deferments of salaries has been ongoing for a while now. But one needs to take one step back and just understand what the contractual relationship is. In sports, there's an added element. So in terms of normal employees, you just have your employment contract, and that's the end in most cases. But in sports, there are added regulatory documents or regulations that apply. So if we zoom into football itself, you have the employment laws of every country where the football is played. And then you have the FIFA regulations, which say what they say in terms of when a contract can expire and what is it when a contract can be varied and so forth. But there's a common thread, though, that if there are to be any changes to an employment contract, it can be a unilateral thing, because contracts by their nature are there are two parties to it, and it's an agreement of the will of parties. So in this case, FIFA has already accepted that even their proposals that they've made to extend seasons and to ensure that competitions are completed are subject to what national laws say, and no one can ever claim that FIFA on its own could order associations to extend the season and by default extend employment contracts where they are ending. There still has to be that discussion and negotiation between the players and the clubs. And there's an added element which I'm sure associations or federations will deal with, because remember, even the registration of the player would have been until 30 June if that was their last season. So come 1 July, technically that player is not registered unless if there's a specific dispensation for that. But maybe I digress a bit on that aspect. Let's go back to salary cuts. So if there are to be any salary cuts and deferments, they have to be negotiated between the clubs and the players. And because we're dealing with a very unique situation, which no one, especially in our generation, has had to deal with, I would almost say I don't think both the players and their representatives and unions and the clubs can pretend to negotiate from a normal position that they normally do when clubs and everyone is making money and games are going on. Right now, we have a situation where some clubs have genuine basis to ask for player salary cuts, to then have players insisting that, no, you can't cut my salary. Perhaps you're faced with a situation where salary cuts or deferments are the best way to continue the league. If you don't take that option, most clubs might actually go into insolvency, and it might mean closing shop, and at the end of the day, there are no people that are earning anything. So it might be an issue of, players would agree to deferments of their salaries or cuts with a view that 50 cents out of every dollar is much better today than over a long period than not having something at all. But if there's any message that could come out of that, is an issue of negotiation, it's an issue of the parties reaching each other, whether it's halfway or three quarters, it depends on the circumstances. But it's not a situation where one party can claim to have all the power to do as they please.
Thanks, man. We've just been joined by Thulaganyo Gaoshubeli, who is the president of the South African Football Players Union. Welcome, sir. Thulaganyo?
His mic is on mute.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, all right.
Welcome to the show, sir. We've been talking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on football, especially African football. What has the impact been when it comes to players in South Africa?
Look, I'm not too sure how much I miss out on.
That much.
Probably the issues that I might talk to are issues that would have already been raised. But there's no denying that COVID has dealt all of us a blow, the economies, and as players, we are alive to that we have been dealt a blow, the economies of countries, the social life of the countries, the political aspect, everything that you can think of. And I think we're not spared anything as the football industry. But you'd also agree that footballers are, as part of the society, as part of the sectors, is one of the sectors that's been hard hit. Because when you look at all issues, you'd realize that football, by its definition, and especially as it relates to sponsorship, it makes its money out of a few things, which would be on broadcasting, which would be the issues of match day, gate takings, the issues of sponsorship, as well as transfer, of players. And when you look at all those things, you get to understand that that's where we really get our monies. But we have been dealt a blow. But football has been dealt a blow, especially as the sports of millions, long even before the COVID. And I think in addressing that and understanding exactly how to move forward in relation to the issues of football and the impact of COVID is to also understand where we come from. I mean, I always say in terms of the issue of sponsorship, the little that we have in the game of football, which is not necessarily enough, will be dealt a blow. But one thing that we cannot do is to use COVID also, to disadvantage the players or the football industry in the name of no COVID, we've been dealt a blow and so forth, which impacts, mainly on the issues of the contractual obligation of the players, because our responsibility is to look at the stability of the contracts, to say, what is it that we need to do and how do we survive going before? And I hope through these discussions we'll then be able to bring together all those issues and get to understand them better. That you see, when you enter into a contract, you enter into a relationship which is of an employer and employee, and no one has got the right to unilaterally change the terms of that particular contract. But yes, of course, we must be mindful of the fact that there are issues, and these are unprecedented situation. We've seen it in 1929, the Great Depression. We've seen it in 2008. But we have not seen this in our own life at this particular point. But we'll talk to those particular things. The players have been impacted. We need to look at those issues. We have seen football resuming in other countries. In South Africa, as things stand, we are still discussing. The Ministry, for an example, of Sport spoke about the issues of going back to training. Now, the issues, of course, that would then need to take place and understand is that what kind of plan do you have in place? Because at the heart of this, which is something that has not been happening for quite a long time, is that the stakeholders in footballers have not been part and parcel of those discussions. So we really want to be there, and we're hoping that with an appropriate time we'll be there and become part and parcel of the discussions. And this must not only happen in SA, but also happen in other countries in terms of how we do, because we are a very important part of the stakeholder relationship.
Cool. Thanks very much, Shehu. I believe that you can hear us now, so that we can bring you into the topic and the impact maybe of COVID-19, perhaps in Nigeria specifically, and tell us, maybe brief us on what's happening in Nigeria so far. We are still struggling to hear you, Shehu. We are still struggling to hear you. Can I introduce now Santo? Santo, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Give us your brief understanding and maybe possible solutions on how we can go forward from here, given the situation that football finds itself in due to the COVID-19.
Well, I think we find ourselves in a situation that maybe we didn't expect, or we don't know how we are going to handle it. And I think from COVID-19, the pandemic, I think it has exposed so many maybe loopholes that maybe we hadn't seen or expected to know how we are going to handle it. And for us to get maybe the solution, it depends where maybe everybody comes from. I think the solution that maybe will work for us might not work for somebody else. It all depends with the current situation or the previous situation that.
Santo? It looks like we've lost Santo there.
I would say a very bad situation, because before that, things were not working well in Kenya. You get me?
Yeah. Okay, let's move on now. Guys, other countries have called for the cancellation of seasons. We know that we're still waiting for the Premier League to resume. In South Africa, we're still waiting for the PSL to resume. Do you think countries that have returned, such as the Bundesliga, that I know of at present, is it something that we should be considering as African football, and is it safe to do so? I'll bring you in, Farai.
I think the part of the underlying reasons for not cancelling the seasons and holding on until now with the hope that we can continue goes back to the issue that I think Tulahanyo put it clearly that, look, financially, football or sport has been impacted more than most industries. And so I think it's an effort by the stakeholders or the powers that be to try and salvage every little game time or every little commercial value we can get from what's left of the season, obviously looking into the future. And as you know, for some leagues, there have been talks that if they are cancelled at the present moment, they have to pay back sponsors, for example, and paying back those sponsors might actually bankrupt some of these leagues. And one cannot ignore the effect it will then have on almost everyone, all the way to the players, since they are employees in this industry, the club owners themselves, whether they had enough in their reserves to sustain the clubs, the leagues after paying back. So in as much as there's needs to balance between the risk of exposing people to health and safety issues, there's also that issue of we might actually have a long-term adverse impact if we do make hasty decisions. Perhaps we need to then continue. And as you would have seen now in most of these leagues that are talking about coming back, Bundesliga is already back, yes. In the EPL, they have put in place these protocols of resuming training. They started off with non-contact training, and now they're moving into contact, and the matches would start. So they've used that time to say, look, COVID is going to be with us for a long time, as the health experts have said. Let's look at ways of minimizing the damage as we go forward, have protocols in place, and do the best we can. And I go back to the issue of FIFA trying as well to extend contracts and leagues and so forth. I think, in my view, in as much as it's a difficult thing to do, it's not impossible with the proper protocols. And in South Africa, as you've mentioned, we wait to see in detail what these directions or directives that the Minister of Sports has spoke about this morning. And obviously, we hope that the clubs and all stakeholders will then engage to make sure that we get back to playing in the most practical way as possible. It doesn't mean that the risk is completely eradicated. It's still there, but it's an industry more than anything else, especially on the professional front. It's well and fair for Farai. If you tell me not to play my five-a-side football for the rest of the year, that's fine. I can live with that. But for professionals, I don't think we could say the same thing.
Okay. Tulahanyo, you've heard what the minister said this morning. You've really touched based on it. What is the union saying about returning to training, especially now, considering that the numbers of positive cases have been increasing in South Africa?
Mr. Makhaya, I think we are in a very complex situation, and I think we must understand that. And I think we must understand the COVID within the confinement and the context here of football in general. And I think Farai mentions a very important point. Let us not look at football, where we are at this point, as just one of those entertainment areas where you're just going to that. To some, it's entertainment. To some, of course, it becomes where you go and socialize and stuff. But footballers, it's about bread and butter issues. Okay? But however, we are mindful of all those issues. But importantly, there must be a balance between the health and the livelihood of the players. How do we then get to that particular point? We are a country, and I want to believe that the world has to be the world has to found its existence of the Constitution. And as South Africa, We are a country that bases everything on the issues of the law. That is the Constitution. As employees, we are covered by the Labor Relations Act. You can talk about the Basic Condition Employment Act, which then begins to talk about that. You've got occupational health and safety, and all those measures. And I must say that under normal circumstances, before football can be played, there must be an investigation, that talks about the issues of occupational health and safety, so that employers ensure that employees are covered when it comes to the issues of safety at work. In South Africa, for an example, when you look at this Occupational Health and Safety Act, it's very clear when you look at Section 8 of it, which says the employer will ensure that there's safety at work. But what does that mean in terms of the core of COVID? Players probably where they are currently, they say, can we go back to training? What would then happen? There is no denying we're going to be with this COVID for the longest of time. But what we need to do is to say, how do we then live with it and minimize and make the most out of it? Now, the minister says players must go to train, but he also mentions the issue of being quarantined for 14 days. We're saying, yes, if we can have everybody, and probably if we were resourced, one probably would suggest that the entire country must be quarantined, and so that they can be visited on sanctions. Or on sections of the economy. Now, if footballers are quarantined for 14 days, tests taking place, sitting at a particular space, maybe we say, let's agree that, and the whole of Johannesburg, it will be for footballers, that's why they're going to be kept until the end of the season. Now you go through this process of testing them, and after testing them 14 days, then you can then go back to the issues of training, but with proper monitoring. But we also are mindful of the fact that in terms of resources, and resources, we're not only talking finance, but the human capital could be the medics, could be the physiotherapists and all that, and the coaches. There might be, certain teams do not have that. But if you agree in total to say, this is the plan and this is the approach, then we should be able to go back and start training. In addressing the very same issue, because what we want last is to say, when COVID is gone, the industry of football is dead, because we cannot afford a situation where players and footballers are not going to be able to go back and play, because it impacts on them. It impacts on them on the ability that are presented by the economy. They may not participate in other issues. Let's say, just take for an example, the market booms in terms of property. Now, because they have not been playing, they don't have the money, they are unable to take advantage of all those issues that they could. Therefore, it says them yes back in terms of how they need to approach. And that is why we've always called for cool heads when we deal with these issues, to balance the two. We've made a call for members, for sponsors as well, to understand that is not only about marketing, because for years, they've been making money out of marketing and out of all this advertising. Then can they bear with us and be able to begin and say, what is it that we need to do? But definitely, things would never be the same, because we'd look at the issues of force majeure going forward, what happens in terms of the contracts of the players and so forth. But to the extent that we're concerned now, we cannot. We also know that the players have got contracts with clubs, and them having contracts with clubs, they must be honored. But when, to the extent that there must be discussions around these issues, as provided in our own laws, is that we know that the employer may not be able to just terminate or deduct without the employee's salary. And we believe that we're having those discussions. Here in South Africa, we've been having fruitful discussions in terms of what we really need to do. But worldwide, the players must be part and parcel of these discussions, because if we do not talk about those things, you'll have a problem. You'll be forced with a situation where if the leagues are to be cancelled, you'll need a serious stimulus package from government to be able to inject the money and other stakeholders. Do we have that? I don't think we have that on the continent, because the attitude of a sponsorship, especially of the monopoly capital, the white previously advantaged, they don't want to invest in the previously disadvantaged sport.
Good. Before I get to Tijani, Santo, something is happening in Kenya right now. I think the club, the Giants Goma here, were crowned champions. but other clubs are against that, and there's apparently some court battles to deal with. Can you give us light on what's happening there?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you're right on the issue. It's quite unfortunate the league was cancelled, and Gor Mahia were named the champion. The manner in which all this was done is what's in question, because most of the stakeholders, or rather the football stakeholders in Kenya, feels like in as much as it's a decision that had to be made, the criteria and the way in which the decision was made was sort of kind of not good, because like Tula said, it's supposed to be a discussion where all the football stakeholders come on board, and we chart the way forward, because at the end of it all, everybody or each and every stakeholder is for the good of the game. And when you undermine, or you feel like somebody else is not in for the good of football, it becomes more or less like a tussle. So when we look at the decision that was made for us to cancel the league, in reality, the situation or the condition that is there in Kenya is something that is really wanting. And looking at the most important thing is that the health of the player. How are we going to look at the health of the player if we say we want to resume the league? Are we going to have safety assurance that these players are going to maybe participate in the league, or rather continue with the league and not be exposed to a situation where maybe they get the virus? And when you look also at the condition of maybe health that is given to the players, it's something that we cannot say that we are well giving our players health conditions that will favor them. Maybe if they fall or they get the virus, they can get treatment well. So for us to cancel the league, I would say it was something okay. We could say is okay, but the way it was done is what is in question. And it brings us also again to a very tricky situation of having court cases, whereby it's going to affect also the players more, in terms of we don't even know now when the league is going to resume. We don't know the fate is going, when are we going to get back to the field. It kind of, again, touches on the mental strength or the mental health of the player. We've been out for 3 months. The players have been out for 3 months, training in solitary, which affects the performance, affects the mental strength. We've had challenges on the finances. Maybe clubs are not paying the players. And this was a challenge that was there even before COVID came. So we find ourselves in a situation where this player has so much to deal with that will in the end affect him, in terms of even if things go back to normal, we'll have to readjust and maybe come back with a stronger mental strength so that you can recover and be in a good position to perform.
Let me bring in Tijani Babangida. Tijani, welcome to the show.
Yes, welcome. Thank you very much. Privileged to be here.
Yeah, cool, man. We're talking about the impact of COVID-19 on football, especially African football. What's your view on it? How has it impacted, according to you, this COVID-19? Tijani, can you hear me? Tijani? It doesn't look like we can hear Tijani there. Tulakhanyo, let me bring you back. In terms of the players, what have they been saying? Are they open to being tested as a matter of fact or compulsory before the start of the season? What have we had on the ground so far, especially in South Africa, where we know especially that we got one case of positive, a case that was confirmed, Orlando Pirates player Ben Mutsari being tested positive?
No, absolutely, Ernest. You see, the players, we've got a very responsible workforce. Players are very responsible in a way that sometimes it baffles me. They are very, very responsible, and they do understand the challenges that we are confronted with. And any responsible member of a society would never disagree with anything that would work better. And the players, first and foremost, they know that as not only as people who are loved by communities, they also have got the responsibility to ensure that they send out proper messaging out there that begins to say it is responsible for you to know your status and test. Just like on any other campaigns that we've had, the players are up to testing, and they are saying, look, we've got no problem playing football. And I want people to understand this. They are more than willing to give their services and play at any given point. They do understand what is at stake. They do understand what needs to happen. However, they're saying to the extent that our health are being guaranteed, we will then go back to play. Just put a certain things. They're not demanding too much. But part of it is to agree that they will go ahead, get tested, and once tested, then they can proceed and play. And those who are found to be on the positive side of COVID, then agree to say they will then be quarantined. But it is a fact that we are part of the society, and they can catch this thing at any given point, you know. They can catch it when you go out, you know, whether you're going to the shopping malls and so forth and so on. And I think we must understand this whole thing within that context, because sometimes when you talk about the players going back to play in football, we're just thinking like, you know, there'll be the worst people who are going to make the spread. And if anything, the players have demonstrated that, you know, by not playing and adhering to the rules, training all by themselves, they are, you know, work very hard to make sure that they flatten the cap. And they are not going to be the first people to go out there and deal with it. But the attitude is very simple. If there are measures in place, if we meet the law, if we meet everything that has been put out there in terms of the Department of Health and so forth, we will then be able to go to play. And because their understanding is more so informed by quite a number of things which we have spoken about, which will be the issues of the commercial agreements that might be, you know, under which will be heavily challenged. Let's give for an example. A player moves from one club to the next. What happens to that? The players, you know that in the, I mean, it's only a few countries where players are guaranteed top salaries. Now, all other countries and most countries or most leagues, the players will rely on things like what? Bonuses on the day. They will rely on signing a contractual obligation. I mean, contracts that, you know, begins to say, these are the things that you must meet. If you score a goal, you get X amount. If you do this, you do that, then they get impacted. I'm just highlighting, you know, the impact of this COVID. To say now, when you know that you would make X amount to do with other issues as a result of COVID, and you cannot make that simply because there is no football, there is no what in the economy, then it does impact you. But we are very ready. Once we have seen, of course, which we would encourage that in each and every country before the game is played, the players are happy, they would have seen a watertight kind of plan. Can you guarantee people 100% that something would not happen? I thought that would be the case. But surely, it must be a plan enough to be able to say, I am happy. In the event we test, we are positive. What kind of support that would be given to this individual? And again, if they are then even going beyond that particular issue, but if you remove them, like we said, from the society, or you put them in the same space, and they should be able to deal with all these issues, because it's very, very, very clear and important. But we are ready, players are ready at any given time. Give us a proper plan, give us a thing of which they want also to be part and parcel of it, say that they have been part and parcel of the discussions in relation to what needs to happen.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We are out of time, and we'd like to thank everyone who joined us on all our live platforms for this discussion for the past 30 minutes or so. Now I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of the number one commentator, Dwayne Diloka. Dwayne, how are you, sir?
Good, Ernest. How are you?
I'm okay, man. I'm okay. You can take over now and take it up to 6 o'clock. I don't know, whatever time the discussion takes you to.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think all of us have been asking ourselves similar questions. Thanks so much to Ernest and his panel. But we're all asking similar questions. What has sport become? What does a path back look like? How have teams and players stayed engaged with fans worldwide? We've witnessed the importance of sports stars educating and encouraging social distancing, the significance of community service and doing things for others in a time where community needs to draw together. But so often it's said that sport brings people together. But this, unfortunately, is the exact thing we currently need to avoid. So we welcome you to this next session of the Football Africa Forum. It's an online summit. And the forum's main objective is to create an awareness around the numerous issues involving players, involving clubs, involving leagues in Africa, both during and following the coronavirus pandemic. Now, this panel is set to discuss the commercial and contractual aspects and concerns of footballers during COVID-19, and we'll try to unpack the legal rights of the various parties in player contracts. I must stress, though, that this panel is not mandated to make any resolutions or proposals on the aspects discussed. It's merely here to examine them. Now, the thought leaders in their respective fields that include two sports lawyers, who have represented both players and clubs in legal disputes, while the other one is principally an agent. And I'm delighted to introduce you to our panel. I think I'm going to start in Nigeria, if I can. Kelvin Mojine, Principal Associate at Sporthouse LP, based in Abuja, the magnificent capital of Africa's most populous nation. Kelvin's a sports lawyer with experience in sports governance and administration, including a compliance and regulatory role with the Nigerian Professional Football League and membership of the Disciplinary Committee of the Nigeria Football Federation. He has a master's degree in sports law from Nottingham Trent University, and he's a member of the editorial board of Law in Sports Africa Subdivision. Of course, all three of the gentlemen we have for you have CVs that would run several minutes if we went through them individually. So we're just going to make short introductions and then get to the content of what they have to say. The other next panelist is the first FIFA accredited agent in South Africa. He's a former Orlando Pirates league winning coach. Mike Makaab, the CEO of Pro Sport International. He's got a clear passion for football and spends part of his time securing the best career paths for his clients. But he's also traveled the world extensively to promote African football and footballers alike, and as CEO of Pro Sport International for the past 2 decades, he oversees all aspects of the global company's sports operations. Our third and final panelist for this specific aspect of the forum is Farai Rosano, partner at Rosano Attorneys, who specializes in sports and entertainment law. He's acted for a wide range of clients, which include individual sports persons, clubs, sports associations, and production houses in the film and television industry. And he's appeared and acted for various parties before special sports dispute resolution tribunals, including the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Farai also serves on the FIFA Pro Bono Council panel and is an editorial board member of for Law in Sport, the Africa Subdivision. But I do want to start then in Nigeria. Kelvin, thank you very much for joining us. I suppose the question mainly for me is why, or is not why should sport return, but how does sport return safely? Does this resonate with players, clubs, leagues, and alike in Africa that you've encountered?
Well, most definitely, not just for the entertainment value, but the commercial value as well. Sports and football in particular does indeed want to return. Then how does football return? I think it's important first and foremost to consider and follow the government and health guidelines. Then within that framework, football can come together and say, okay, these are the things we can do within those guidelines. We can get players, club staff, and all the relevant stakeholders tested to confirm they are free of the virus and remove or at least minimize to the very minimum any risk of spreading the virus. And so once you have such a proposal and it's acceptable to government, with government and health support, I see no reason why sports or football cannot return. Although one significant aspect might be without fans for the short to medium term.
Yes, I fear that is set to be very much the case. And in terms of its returning safely, we've seen aspects around the world already, decisions being made on the various leagues. But Mike, if I could bring you in now, I suppose one of the aspects that people are asking about players as well is players in Africa don't seem to have the similar publicity in terms of loss of income as they have been in Europe. But how significantly have some of your clients been hit in terms of loss of income, including commercial endorsements?
Firstly, Dwayne, thanks very much. And it's a very valid question because, yes, some of my clients that I represent that are at certain football clubs in South Africa have had to take a pay cut. Some of those pay cuts are permanent. So in other words, the funds that have been taken away from their earnings will not be returned. It's also been done on a consultative basis in most instances. And that's important because I think what we all have to understand as stakeholders in this beautiful game is that we've never experienced anything like this. I think since World War II, football has never been disrupted on this scale. And so all stakeholders, I think, have to be very understanding in the way they respond to the effect of COVID-19. And unfortunately, it's going to impact on all stakeholders. Sponsors, and you quite rightly say that, commercial endorsements are also affected because there has to be certain obligations on the part of our clients to do certain things contained within their endorsement agreements. It's impossible to perform some of those tasks now, and I guess what will have to happen going forward is we'll sit down with the various sponsors and people involved in these endorsements and try and find a common way forward to possibly assist this whole situation. It's very, very tough, I have to tell you.
Yeah, we've seen it already. A couple of clubs going up for sale in South Africa alone. And Farai, if I could perhaps bring you in there, are there any sort of stipulations or clauses in contracts for players who might be left in limbo if their clubs simply say, we can't pay you full salary? Or, as in the case of clubs like Tsakuma Tamati or Bloemfontein Celtic, they're saying, we're for sale and we don't know where the players stand?
Thanks very much, Dwayne. I think the starting point again goes to the aspect that Mike has touched on, that some, if not most of these things would have to be subject to negotiation. So, for example, the salary cuts have been negotiated. It couldn't just be imposed. And if you move to a situation where the club says, well, we don't have the money, we don't know what's going to happen, we're up for sale and so forth, it's not a simple thing that, well, we're just going to sell and disappear. It doesn't work like that. The club that sells would have to seek the consent of the league. And in that process, there will be a consultation with the players' unions and so forth, whether that sales should be given the green light or not. And if there's an issue with players' salaries not having been paid or players being owed, I don't think they could simply get the green light. And secondly, at least the PSL rules have a specific clause that mentions that if you are going to sell, or if you are going to sell a club, you need to guarantee that the contracts of the players will be honored. So I don't think there will be a situation where anyone just sells and disappears. That wouldn't happen at all. And lastly, perhaps while this is going on, if there's any club or any employer that's saying we can't pay and they are not paying at all, instead of negotiating whether it's salary deferrals or not, they have to be mindful, one, of South African laws relating to breach of contract. For how long can you not perform your contract? And secondly, which I've always thought is a much more generous provision, is actually the FIFA provisions, which says if you haven't paid a player or an official for at least 2 months, then they can terminate that contract and sue you for breach. So I don't think it's free for all at all. There are regulations that apply that people will have to be mindful of.
Although for the players now who earn a living off this, this might take many, many years to, of course, formalize and conclude. But I mean, you work with FIFA on the FIFA Pro Bono Council, Farah, if I can stay with you. FIFA have made some proposals to extend seasons. They've brought in changes like going up to a fifth substitute to aid player safety. But have they given any guidelines to the situation, contracts, leagues, etc., and beyond that?
Yes, they have, and in all fairness to FIFA, so they acknowledge that they can't impose some of these things on clubs and federations. They've then issued guidelines which they encourage all the parties to take into account, be it in trying to remember if a player was in their last season this season, their contract expires, I think, exactly in 30 days or 31 days, 30 June. And beyond that, they might actually not be a player of that club, they might not even be registered for that club. And FIFA has issued these guidelines to say you need to consider that players might actually have to play beyond the current registration period. They also understand that there are some players who have signed pre-contracts come 1 July, they should be moving to the new club. But they have said, look, clubs and players and their representatives must talk and try and reach an agreement. If there is a situation where no agreement has been reached and one of the parties is now claiming breach of contract, which primarily might be the players, FIFA has also issued certain factors that they say they will consider if a dispute gets before them. So they will look into were there any genuine attempts to negotiate and reach an agreement. Take an example of a salary has now been cut by 70%. They will look at, did you guys try to negotiate and reach an agreement? If it was just a unilateral thing, probably the club will have problems there. They will also look at the extent of the reduction and other factors like the club's financial position and so forth. So I go back to the issue of it's not free for all. There are certain guidelines that people will have to take into account. In as much as they are not binding, they are there for people to consider. If you then act in a way that is completely opposite to the guidelines, I think you will battle to succeed if you are before these tribunals when they assess whether they should rule in your favor or not.
Fair enough. Thank you. Mike, if I can get back to you, I mean, this right now, I suppose, in a sense, is very much a life or death period. And we've seen this virus, it's certainly not discriminating. And there are many people that have caught this and succumbed to coronavirus, which initially I think many people considered not so serious. But what complications arise if a player fears for, let's say he has an immunocompromised child or an asthmatic parent who lives in the same house and refuses to return to training or playing if the government and the league says this is what's going to happen? I mean, do you know any people in football who experience things like these conundrums and how they've said they would deal with it?
To be honest, I think the football fraternity is a family that probably is almost born of one mother's womb. We all want to get back to playing football, whether we have football players, coaches, technical staff, administrators. So I think it would really have to be an extreme case where a football player, particularly one who's been sidelined now for 3 months without any activity, where a football player is going to refuse to play based on the fact that he or she is scared to contract the virus and pass it on to someone else. I think, Dwayne, it doesn't only apply to the football industry, it applies to all industry. You know, we go back to work and we might have 8 healthy people in an office, social distancing, having all the necessary requirements in place in terms of sanitation, etc. One of us somehow contracts the coronavirus and we move into a public space. That's unfortunately the reality of this horrible virus. So I think in terms of our footballers, they're so eager to get back onto the football field, you're probably going to have to lock them up to prevent them from doing so. But it's, and again, Tijani said that he, he's consulted with his union members, and the truth of the matter is that the most vital thing is that football clubs have to put in place an environment that is going to be as safe and as sanitized as possible, and procedures in place that are going to reduce the possibility of spreading this virus. I'm sure that will definitely happen in the Premier Soccer League in South Africa and the National Football Division. And if you have a look at the whole idea behind the concept of having the teams based in maybe one or two areas and trying to confine the movement of those players until the end of the fixture list, I think that's a very, very sensible thing. So I'm just hoping that all of those processes will be put into place correctly, and hopefully we won't have any problems or too many problems.
Yeah, look, I know many players have been training alone. They are eager to get back and to play, but surely they can't simply just return to training and then subsequently a week or two later return to playing. I know cricketers have suggested at least a 6-week period of training together, and that's a sport that relies far less on team interaction. I mean, if we say, and use that as a guideline, and say a 6-week period of training together, if they started training today, it's mid-July they would come back. If you have a 3-day break between games, even if they were played consecutively, that would take another month to finish the league. I mean, we're looking into the middle of August here to complete the league in South Africa, as a random example. Is that something that we're going to have to consider as being realistic and maybe even changing the subsequent seasons?
Most definitely. I think we're going to have to treat the resumption of football as a pre-season. And my guess, and as a former football coach, I would say that you need a minimum of 4 weeks to get the players back to any sort of condition to play a competitive match. If that happens and we can get that right, I would believe that we could use the month of July and possibly 1 week in August to complete the fixtures. We've done it before, and we can do it again. And this is where I think big squads are going to come into play. And you alluded to the fact that FIFA have allowed the 5 substitution rule. And just to add to that, although there will be 5 substitutes allowed, you will only allow those 5 substitutes at any 3 times during the game, so that if you're leading 1-0 and hanging on for dear life, you don't use your 5 substitutes in the last 5 minutes at 1 minute intervals. But I think there's a whole host of things that can be done to end the season, albeit later than we anticipated. And then, do we really need a pre-season before we get into the new season? I doubt it very much. Maybe a short break to allow certain administrative processes to take place, where contracts have to be changed, where there are transfers, new contracts are coming into place, and then kick off the new season as quickly as possible. If I remember correctly, we went back to the 2010 World Cup. We started our season late because we hosted it in South Africa, and yet we still managed to finish all our competitions on time.
And we finished the previous season 3 months early and then played cup competition subsequent as well. So you're quite right. Although this is unpredictable, the coronavirus, and certainly the period worldwide is unprecedented, we have managed to adapt previously. But Farai, just going back to the simplest of questions, really, what are the legalities of extending contracts short-term when you have to consider that across Africa and indeed across the world, all these players, clubs, leagues are surely subject to government regulations and stipulations?
Well, I think the issue of if the question is how long could the contracts be, football, perhaps like most of the sports, is in a unique situation to what would a normal employee would be. So in a normal industry, you just get employed for whatever period, whereas in football and other sports, they specify a contract should be for this long, and it can start from a certain, at least it can end by a certain date. And because of what FIFA has proposed right now about extending the league seasons everywhere, that seems not to be an issue at all. The only issue becomes if the player is going to be given a 1.5 month contract, what sort of salary should they get? Do they get the last salary in June of that year? Or they might say, well, sorry, I actually need more. So let's take a practical example. If player A had already signed a pre-contract with club B, and Club B was going to pay him 1.5 the salary is getting at Club C. He might actually say, well, look, guys, for July, I should have been earning 1.5. The salary I am earning here, that's what I need. Oh, well, there are risks of I might actually get injured during these 1.5 months. I need much more, then that complicates things. But then on the flip side, you also have players that are running out of contracts. They don't know what's going to happen come 1 July if the league is not extended. What does that mean for them? Do they then be desperate to say, oh, I know you were paying me a lot, but because of this 1.5 months, I'm happy with the 75% of what I was getting. So those are dynamics that will come into play, and I'm sure Mike would be more placed to discuss those than me. But yeah.
Well, yeah, Mike, do you have any thoughts on that?
He's opened a hornet's nest. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Listen, one thing that has gone through my head is we all know, and Farai will have so much more knowledge than I do on the legal aspect of this, but we all know that an agreement is a legal document, and it's all very well saying that the season can be extended by a month and a half, and that's what FIFA has suggested, because quite rightly, FIFA suggests, and the member associations then have to implement based on local employment regulations, common consensus between all the football clubs, the health authorities giving guidelines. All of these things have to be taken into account. It's not just a matter of saying, well, we're going to extend the season and the teams can play, and we're just going to extend the contracts by a month and a half. Well, let's take, for example, a player signs a 1-year contract and he has a signing on fee, which is based upon that period of 12 months. Now you're going to extend it for a further 2 months and offer him the same salary. Does he expect a pro rata increase in his signing on fee? And again, Farai has made such a valid point here. If a player's contract increases in the new contract that he has signed in the new season, and it's with a different club, does he then demand his pay equal to that new amount? I think here we call for maturity, and a lot will depend upon the way the collective bargaining goes. The union will play a very important role, I hope. Football clubs and their administrators collectively will play an important role. Football agents have to be mature, and they have to look at this thing from a very, very objective basis, because what you lose in the roundabouts, hopefully you're going to gain in the swings. I really think that if the season is extended by a month and a half, then we should try and keep it as simple as possible. Players earn what they've been earning, and they move on to their new club when the new season starts. And as Farai said, that could be the 1st of August, could be the 1st of September. So at this point, we don't really know.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a force majeure clause that would allow this to extend, but certainly common sense needs to be very much an aspect of the decisions that are made. But Farai, I mean, there are so many aspects to consider, and we've expounded on a few already, but trying to find some form of fairness or justice in deciding leagues is not working. And whether it's declaring it null and void, whether it's stating that the log currently are the final standings, or finding a time to finish the league. Have you found in your extensive looking over any of these decisions, whether it's been like in Kenya where they said current log is final, or whether it's been in leagues where leagues have been declared null and void, or even saying we are going to find time to finish the league? Is there an element of fairness in any of these that outweighs another, or are they all bad ideas, but one is less bad than the other?
I think there are so many competing interests that make it very difficult for most of these clubs or associations to pick one way of finalizing the league over the other. So in Belgium, for instance, there was one game and there was an unassailable points difference. Maybe it made it easier. In Kenya, they relied on the clause that they have in their statutes, which I must confess that was a bit of having foresight on their side. They had such a clause, but obviously the implementation of the clause is a separate issue altogether. Now, if you look at the South African league as it stands, you have competing interests at the top, who wins the league and who becomes runner-up, and then you have competing interests at the bottom as well. So it might, if you can't really pick one and say, well, we just go with points per game as a determining factor, because then probably the clubs at the bottom would be aggrieved, saying, well, we were going to pay more bonuses per each match going forward. The points per match was going to increase, that sort of thing. And then the same applies to the first division as well, where you have also competing interests at the top and the bottom. But I think more fundamentally, when you consider that, football is not just for fun, the value that you're going to get to conclude the season by simply using a mathematical calculation might not actually be value to your sponsors, to your spectators, and other stakeholders, because believe it or not, some clubs have supporters that pay their season tickets and so forth. They would be wanting value for that. Sponsors want value for the matches. They don't want a mathematical calculation. And there's me and the mamas that sell food at the games and so forth. I know at the moment it's not possible because of the COVID, but those are considerations that one takes into account. That do we just pick one formula over the other? No, it wouldn't be that easy.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are so many stakeholders to consider. I myself am a commentator, so I'm losing out on the opportunity to commentate matches that are being played live at any given point as well. And I'm just a very, very tiny cog and an enormous animal. I think the Major League Baseball, Mike, if I'm not mistaken, estimated that if you had to play the league and quarantine everybody involved, you'd be looking at over 10,000 people quarantined. And at the moment, they've just said it can't be done. I mean, even the Bundesliga trying to quarantine players. We've seen the incidents with the Augsburg coach forbidden from rejoining his team until he had 2 negative tests after leaving the hotel to buy toothpaste. 2 Bundesliga players under quarantine testing positive. Ultimately, though, we must ask, what have we learned from this from a player perspective? What is it that you want to see going forward as somebody who represents the best interests of players?
A tough question to answer, because none of us have ever experienced anything like this in our lifetime. So I do think that contracts are going to change. I think that contracts are going to be looked upon with this, not hopefully never another virus of this nature, but with force majeure taking a major role in one of the compartments of the contract. I truly hope that I would like to talk from the point of view of an intermediary. We used to be called agents, now we intermediaries. So I'd like to be. I apologize for that. I've always felt that as agents, we've been looked upon as an outsider. Our profession has always deemed to be one that adds cost to the top line, because of the fact that we tend to negotiate contracts that are probably higher than clubs feel are fair. I'd like to believe that in the 22 odd years that I've been involved in the industry, that I've tried to wear a cap which is as neutral as possible, because I always believe that the most important thing in any deal is a deal that is equitable. Because if you have a deal that is fair-sided, it will be one that will offer longevity and a happy longevity to the parties involved. So I'd like to see contracts that are more inclined towards that fair-sidedness, contracts that have a little bit more compassion in them as opposed to pure legal business. And I know that's very, very difficult, but I do think that this coronavirus will have an impact on the human race, and I hope it has an impact on the human race, where we see life through different lenses, that we see each other as we should see each other and not as a commodity, and that we try and embrace each other. And in the realm of football, administrators, club owners, commentators, legal people, agents, all of us football players should be looked upon as a family with our differences, but with one common objective in mind, the betterment of the industry of football and the sport of football.
That's a fantastic message, but I do have concerns about how that might be carried out practically, Mike Makaab.
Yep.
That said, we have unfortunately not been able to reconnect with Calvin Omojino. I want to get more comments from Nigeria, and particularly a Nigerian perspective. So Farai, the final word is going to be for you. I mean, there are going to be, I get a greater sense of occupational health clauses, stipulations, and not only from in players' contracts, I presume in club contracts, and leagues are going to change the way that they comport themselves, and indeed what might happen, and be prepared for so much more. But from your perspective, and a legal and contractual perspective, what have you found are the most significant things that are likely to change in the future?
Well, it depends. I think one of the issues that arise, especially for our league in South Africa, and perhaps most of the leagues that do not use sort of a stipulated or a contract like in the EPL, for example, where everyone uses a standard contract, you have varying positions. Some clubs and players might have dealt with these issues differently, whereas some might have just dealt with them on a basic level. But ultimately, the laws that apply will continue to apply. I think maybe as a starting point, we will have a massive change from a legislation point of view. So there might be holes that will be plugged in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, in terms of the COIDA, how it operates, compensation, and so forth. And if you listen to Minister Nglesi yesterday, he was touching on an issue, for example, of employees that are placed on forced sick leave. In some instances, they would have been unpaid, but now the government saying, no, it will have to be paid, and so forth. I think that's where the biggest changes will occur, and those by operation of law will trickle down to clubs and players. For clubs and players that have been taking these issues lightly, I think they will now have a lot of legislative compliance to deal with. And possibly from insurance point of view as well, they would have to look into these things because some insurance policies might be deemed voidable if they fail to comply with this applicable legislation and so forth. And perhaps I digress from employment players' contracts now. From competition regulation, I think we are going to see a lot more mathematical calculation clauses at the end. That should we stop at a certain point, this is the formula. I think we lost Dwayne there.
We've lost Dwayne, so maybe I'm going to quickly.
How about you, Mike?
I'm going to quickly ask you a simple question, and that's the one around mathematical formula. If, for example, you look at the Premier Soccer League right now in South Africa, certain teams haven't played as many games as others. If you applied the mathematical formula that we're talking about, and the only one that I can think of is, and the simplest one would be the number of points gathered per game played. You would look at Kaizer Chiefs winning the league, because mathematically, if they continued with what they've done over the season, they cannot be caught. Do you honestly think that that's something that can be implemented in the future? And is it something that you think will be acceptable in a worldwide context?
Well, I must put a disclaimer here. I became a lawyer because maths was not my strength. So if I do suggest something that's not possible, bear with me. I think anything is possible, bearing in mind that these rules are a form of a contract. So all the clubs involved at a PSL stage, for example, if it's negotiated up front, yes, there are some people or some clubs that might not be happy. But at the end of the day, they would have to then agree on the specific formula. I think one of the things that could arise, if someone had played 27 games and someone had played 29, do you still just stick to points per game, even though these two extra games, one club might have won them, the other one would be saying, well, look, you are now going to judge us from how we performed our first two matches, whereas we have traditionally been strong finishers. I mean, those arguments I've heard already that, no, we've been strong finishers and so forth. So perhaps, and this is just me, my wild suggestion, those mathematical formulas might actually have to be in stages where they say, should the league stop after having played 50% matches, this is what will happen. After 75% matches, this is what would happen. And I would assume that would definitely be different to what happens after 50%, because there are certain considerations to make and so forth until you get to 100%. But again, I don't know if that would resolve the primary issues that most of us would be concerned about, which is the value for money from a commercial perspective, because it's a business at the end of the day. It's not just about crowning champions and we move on.
Farai, while we're waiting for Dwayne, an interesting legal question. Let's assume that all 32 clubs, so the 16 football clubs in the Premier Soccer League and the 16 football clubs in the National First Division, agree to some sort of formula to end the season. And here I'm particularly referring to contracts that players have with football clubs, loans that clubs have with other clubs for players, which end at the end of the season. Let's assume that 32 football clubs come to an agreement, 16 for the NFD, 16 for the PSL. I, as a player now, have a legal agreement. I refuse to play beyond the end of my agreement for a particular football club. Where do you see it in terms of the legal standing?
I think there's no easy answer to that, because it's going to be a novel situation where, as I mentioned earlier, even though FIFA came up with these non-binding guidelines, those are things that will not be ignored if you land before a tribunal and you have to deal with the issue. So if I understand your question, let's say for argument's sake, today the league says the season is being cancelled, tomorrow is the last day, we'll give you the tally and so forth, and that's the end. And then, so if a player could argue that, well, then effectively my loan, if I'm on loan, has ended. 1 June, I must go back to my parent club. And then the parent club says, hey, hang on, it actually ends on 30 June. And now he has to refer a dispute. So on that, from that perspective, as a player, you would want to enforce what FIFA puts as guidelines. But if you turn the tables and you say the league is going to continue until beyond the initial date, and the player refuses to continue. Yes, as I said, a contract is a contract. It ends at a certain stage. But don't forget that FIFA has now also put certain things that are clearly applicable to football, not the law. For example, they've suggested that transfers be put on hold, registration of transfers be put on hold, and so forth. So as a player, I think you will battle to argue a case before a football tribunal on 5 July saying, my new club is refusing to pay me, even though I had a contract with them from 1 July, because the league is still going on. They are not paying me. Those tribunals will then look at what was the negotiation. Have you tried to follow what FIFA put as guidelines? Even if you succeed with your claim, should the damages be 100% what you should have received in a normal situation? Because this is a sort of unique situation. So I think there's no clear-cut answer to that. It would depend on the facts of each case. But like you said earlier, common sense would have to prevail if we have to avoid some of these disputes, because the last thing players and clubs don't want to be embroiled in is a 6-month dispute over an issue that could have been resolved by negotiation. Because if you land up in a dispute, now you can't be cleared to join a new club. Alternatively, you can't be cleared to register new players, all because you're fighting over a 1.5 month period. I don't think that would be sensible at all.
Farai, let me then ask you this: is football protected by the fact that the majority of contracts legally refer to footballing tribunals as opposed to courts of law in terms of addressing disputes?
I think the simple answer to that would be, if you go back to the judgment of the High Court in the Ndoro matter, it clearly states that football is always subject to the laws of the country anyway. So you could never pretend that you exclude courts at all. And then there have been many cases from an employment perspective where people have gone to the labor court, for example, and the court confirmed that, yes, you're still subject to the laws of the country, but there are certain things that would have to be met then, because the reference to the tribunals in these rules refers to internal remedies. So if you rushed off to court, for example, without exhausting those internal remedies, you might face a problem, because the court, if the point is raised, the court might actually say, hey, you've jumped the gun, go back to internal remedies, which has occurred in many instances. Or in some cases, if you can convince the court that, look, you shouldn't be compelled to go there for whatever reason, the courts would still be willing to listen to you. But the primary point, though, is whatever tribunal you go to, the law is the law. It will still apply, obviously adjusted in accordance with the unique circumstances of the sport. But the law will still be applied, whether it's by the court or by the football tribunal. Another legal question. Because Dwayne, please rescue me. Mike is now bombarding me. I'm joking, Mike.
Another legal question that I'm going to ask you is, would it be as simple as adding a clause which states a contract will end on the 30th of June? Because that's when the majority of contracts throughout the world of football end, unless you have a season like the one in Sweden, for example, which follows the calendar year. But in most countries, first world countries in the world and in European countries, the season ends on the 30th of June, and with that, footballing contracts end on the 30th of June. Would it be as simple as adding a clause to state the 30th of June or the end of the season, whichever is the later, provided it's not 90 days later than the 30th of June? And I'm putting it in absolute layman's terms. Can you foresee something like that happening?
Yeah, well, it's a possibility. I don't think anyone could suggest that it can't happen, but I don't know whether it will resolve the problem that we're facing, because remember, even FIFA at the moment says this is what they interpret the contract to say. Yes, there's a 30 June date, but the intention between the parties has always been that the player or the coach is going to be at the club for the rest of the season. So if the season extends beyond 30 June, we deem that to be the season. But so you could add that clause as we suggested, or you could be as vague as you want and say until the end of the season. The problem is we go back to interpretation disputes. So one team or club might actually finish their matches earlier for some ever reasons. Okay, so let's say they're playing Champions League, they have 10 more matches in the Champions League, so they are now a month behind. If I'm not in the Champions League, I'll be saying to my players, well, the season has ended, and then my last match is on 30 May, or whatever.
Sure.
But the players will be saying, no, but it's not over because the other team is still playing. Then we are back to the debate we are having now, where there's no specific dates at all. So I don't know. Sorry, Mike. So I think these are novel issues that we have to deal with as we go. Perhaps, as they say, hindsight is a perfect science. Once the storm has settled down and we now look back and see where we can make amends, we probably will have clearer answers.
I'm going to reverse the roles here, because we seem to be having a few technical problems backstage, and it is being sorted out. I'm going to reverse the roles, and I'm going to put you in the chair to see if there's maybe any questions you'd like to ask me of an intermediary.
Yeah, certainly there will be a whole lot of questions that I would want, Mike. The primary one, obviously, it relates to this issue of when the season, at which point the season ends, and so forth. I mean, so then you obviously would have players or people that you act for asking you, so what do we do? I'm just putting it a hypothetical question now. You have a player that's saying, Mike, as you know, we are not sure where I'm supposed to be playing on 1 July. What do we do? I would be interested in knowing what you'd advise those players.
Well, it's a fantastic question, and it's also a very practical question, because I'm actually embroiled in a number of those cases at the moment. So let's take a situation with one of our players whose contract ends at the end of June. We are busy negotiating with his club, and at the same time, because we cannot come to a conclusion with his club, we also have informed his club that we will be talking to other clubs at the same time. And here we bring the statute into play, which states that 6 months prior to the expiration of a footballer's contract, you can enter into negotiations with a club of your choice and enter into a pre-contract prior to the start of the new season. So we have a situation now with a footballer. It's a very practical situation where the club has expressed an interest in renewing his contract. The player has expressed a serious interest in remaining with his football club. He's a family man. He's very happily settled here in Durban. And the thing is that at this point, we cannot come to an agreement financially because, quite correctly, the football club doesn't know the long-term consequences of COVID-19. How will the sponsorships be affected? How will television broadcasts be affected? And I don't have to tell you, those all play a vital role, and they're interlinked. So it starts with the television broadcast, it then travels to the sponsor, from the sponsor to the club, from the club to the amount of income that the club is going to generate for the season. And that includes attendance figures and attendance at live matches. And we also don't know when that will become a reality again. So the football club cannot put a finite figure to paper. So we are now forced to be discussing a possible contract with 2 or 3 other football clubs in various parts of the country. Imagine the situation that exists here, because those clubs themselves don't know what their budget is going to be, their finite budget is going to be for the new season. And the football player, as a family man, he has kids that are at school. He doesn't know where he'll be geographically in the next couple of months. So we have a very, very tough situation in terms of the practical implications of the season not finishing as prescribed or as originally thought would be the case 30th of June.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think, you see, those are practical considerations that would have to be made as opposed to us lawyers thinking of what does the black letter law say. That's what we lay down. So it would be interesting to see where this takes us. I've been reading through the messages here. I understand we have lost our host. So Mike and I have staged a coup. We are now the host of this program. I see Mr. Davids has tried to come back in, but he couldn't. Brian has just confirmed that. I've tried to go to the live comments to see if we can pick questions, but I think there have been a lot more, so I don't know. Some of them might have already been answered. I wouldn't try and go back to that. And unfortunately, I'm not the host, so we can't even let in live questions through the calls. So perhaps, Mike, let me start by thanking you for being here. I enjoyed the discussion, and then apologize to everyone else that we were defeated by the technology. I'm sure the next one there will be an improvement on that. And Gerrit says they are working on that. And Mike, perhaps you can just give us a parting shot, because I see we have now been on at it for an hour and a half instead of an hour. So if you can just give us a parting shot, and perhaps before I give it to you, Mike, I don't have a mandate from the organizers here. Perhaps those who have burning questions could email the questions to the organizers, and they can consider them and decide whether they forward that to Mike or me or Kelvin and all the other panelists. They can answer if they are able to do so. Over to you, Mike.
Yes, and again, Farah, thank you for your wonderful insight. I've been listening.
Sorry, Mike. Maybe before that, like I said, I was worried that I might pick questions that have already been answered, but there's one that has just come through and is directed to you. It says, how would the consideration of player fatigue and burnout and well-being impact as seasons are combined?
Well, let's look at this in perspective. The players effectively, although a number of players, and we have to hope that the majority of clubs and players have been training individually and in many cases online in a group. They've had a break, a sustained break, and it just means that when they do come back, we have to be very mindful of the fact that there are going to be crammed fixtures into a short space of time, and that can be detrimental to the well-being of the players. And here the medical staff, the physiotherapists, the doctors, the physical trainers, and the entire technical staff are going to have to be very alert as far as that is concerned. We hope that the 5 substitute rule takes the load off the starting 11. So you're now substituting, and in the majority of cases will be 50% of your outfield players. But I don't think that we need a big break at the end of this current season, because we've already effectively had your pre-season or your off-season prior to the end of this existing season. So effectively, we're looking at a new season which will probably have 10 or 12 more games than ordinarily it would be the case. And here, I would surmise that the midterm break, so the break that you have in midterm, could probably be extended from a week to 2 weeks, just to allow players to recover. It's a very valid question, Farai, and it's one that hopefully science and modern technology will have the correct answer for.
Thanks, Mike. That was a question from Emil Smith. So thanks, Emil, for that. And I hope Mike has answered you. Now over to you, Mike, for your closing remarks, and then we'll be off air.
Yeah, Farai, just to finish off what I said, thank you so much for the wonderful insight and the knowledge that you've given us on the legal side of the impact that coronavirus has had on football and how you see it panning out going forward. From my side, first and foremost, to my fellow South Africans and fellow humans throughout the world, guys, I hope that we all can play a really significant part in assisting each other in whatever way we can to make this load a lot easier for each of us. In terms of the football fraternity, I think it's important that we show maturity now beyond what we've ever shown in terms of finding solutions to ending the season and to resuming a season which is going to be under pressure from day one. So we all have to be sensible in the way we address these issues and hopefully come up with a solution that is good for everyone involved, all stakeholders in football.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much to everyone that has followed this session from the beginning or joined along the way and was still with us. We appreciate your time. We know you have much better things to do than listening to me and Mike and the rest of us, but you've dedicated your time to that. We thank you. Unfortunately, as we said, we lost the hosts, Gerrit and everyone else. Therefore, we're probably going to have an abrupt end where Mike will just switch off and I switch off and we don't know what happens to the system. But thank you very much for joining us. Cheers.
God's blessings.
Thank you. Bye.